That night, the Aurora restaurant was quieter than usual. It was one of those luxury places where every piece of cutlery has its own place. Every customer has a famous surname and every mistake costs a career. And it was right there, in the middle of the room full of powerful people, that something completely out of script happened. Lucas, a 10-year-old boy with messy hair and the brightest eyes imaginable, was sitting next to his father, Richard Santoro, a billionaire, owner of a technology empire and a cold reputation wherever he went. Lucas wore 2 iron rods attached to his legs, which lightly hit the floor every time he moved. Since the accident that left him partially paralyzed 2 years ago, that was the first time he had gone out to dinner with his father in public, and it was precisely when the pianists began to play a soft melody, the kind that seems to lull time, that everything happened. Diana, one of the waitresses, black, with a firm posture and a tired look, approached the table with a discreet smile. She was invisible to most of the customers, as always, but not for Lucas. Miss, he said suddenly, his voice shaky but resolute. Would you dance with me? The waitress froze. The already quiet restaurant fell into an even deeper silence. Forks froze in midair. Glasses stopped inches from the mouth. Everyone looked. Mr. Santoro, please control your son, the manager said curtly, appearing like a shadow beside the table. This is inappropriate. This is not a dance hall, and our employees are not here for this kind of entertainment. Diana looked at Lucas. He held out his hand to her, trembling, hesitant, but full of hope. Richard looked away, uncomfortable. Lucas, sit down, his father said quietly but firmly. Now, Diana hesitated. Everyone's eyes were on her. Important clients, co-workers, her own manager. She knew exactly what would happen if she accepted, but at that moment, she saw in that boy's eyes something she herself knew well. If a desire to be seen, not as a problem, not as a burden, but as someone, as a person. Mr. Thornton, my shift is over, she said calmly, taking off her apron and folding it carefully. She placed it on the tray. Then, with a gentle smile at Lucas, she added, I can't dance in an apron, can I? And then, in front of the shocked high society, Diana took the boy's hand. He stood up with effort, the iron bars scraping against the floor with a painful sound, but she didn't rush him. She didn't try to guide him. She just followed his rhythm. As they took their first steps, clumsy and slow, a whisper spread. She's going to be fired tomorrow. But Diana didn't care. And Richard, for the first time in a long time, didn't know what to think either. All he saw was his son smiling and leading. Diana and Lucas were there, in the middle of the room, dancing. Or trying to dance. The steps weren't perfect, nor smooth, nor even rhythmic. But they were real. They were his. And that was enough for the atmosphere in the restaurant to begin to change, even if subtly. With each shuffling step, with each hesitant movement of his legs strapped in metal splints, the boy gained something he had long since lost, confidence. And Diana, with the calm of someone who has seen the world upside down and still kept going, let him lead, even when he tripped over his own feet. Richard remained seated, his eyes glued to his son. That scene seemed to tear him off the pedestal he lived on for a second. He wasn't the untouchable billionaire. He was just a father, watching mutely his son do what all the doctors had said he wouldn't do. Take the lead. Lead. Try. The manager, Thornton, approached again, nervous. Mr. Santoro, he whispered, bowing formally. I can assure you that this will not happen again. The employee will be duly warned, in fact, fired, if you will. Richard didn't answer right away. Something inside him seemed conflicted. He was used to making quick, cold decisions, without thinking twice. But now, there was something in that moment that held him back. He looked at Lucas and suddenly he saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Joy, a shy smile on his son's face, an expression of overcoming, of victory. Richard remembered Elizabeth, his late wife, dancing with Lucas in the living room of their house before the accident. She'd said, it's not about perfection, Rick, it's about connection, and that was it. For the first time since the accident, Lucas was connecting with someone and even more so, with himself. Diana, after 3 small steps, gave a small theatrical bow and said with the utmost seriousness in the world, thank you for asking me to dance, sir. It was an honor. She then gently let go of Lucas's hand and began to walk away. Richard's voice cut through the air. Softer than anyone expected, he turned away. He stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and looked at Diana. What's your full name? She stopped, surprised, and answered firmly, Diana Johnson, sir. Richard repeated slowly, as if recording something precious, Diana Johnson. With an elegant movement, he took a card from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to her. Come to my office tomorrow, 10 o'clock. All eyes turned to her. Diana took the card with a firm hand, but anyone who looked closely would see that her fingers were trembling slightly, not out of fear, but because she knew that this moment could be the beginning of something. As she walked away toward the kitchen, Lucas looked at his father curiously. Dad, why did you do that? Richard didn't know how to answer, because, at that moment, he didn't know either. He only felt that something had changed, and maybe for the first time, it was he who needed to learn to dance to the rhythm of others. The next morning, the sky over the city was gray and heavy. But that didn't stop Diana from putting on her best navy blue skirt and a carefully ironed white blouse. The only pair of closed-toe shoes she owned were clean, though worn at the edges. She tied up her hair, took a deep breath, and picked up the card she'd tucked inside the Bible on her dresser. Montgomery and Santoro Group, 18th floor. The building was huge, a mirror of glass and steel, touching the clouds. Diana felt like a piece out of place in here. The people in the lobby wore clothes that looked like they'd come from a fashion magazine. She clutched her battered purse to her chest like an invisible suit of armor. "Diana Johnson for Mr. Santoro," she told the receptionist politely. The woman looked her up and down, the judgment in her eyes barely concealed. She picked up the phone and made a quick call. "Come on up, Miss Winters will escort you." In the elevator, Diana studied her reflection in the brushed steel mirror. It wasn't fear she felt. It was the same quiet strength that had kept her on her feet since childhood. When the doors opened, she was greeted by an elegant woman with impeccable posture and sharp eyes. "Mr. Santoro is in a meeting. Please come with me." The two walked down a mirrored hallway where employees were casting curious glances. After all, it wasn't common to see a simple black woman being escorted through there. As they entered a waiting room, the woman suddenly turned around. "What did he send for you for? He's going to offer some kind of compensation, I suppose. Maybe a sum of money and a discreet request for silence." Diana raised her eyebrows. "Is that what usually happens around here? Enough for me to know how it ends. Powerful people do what they want, and people like us are paid to forget." Diana smiled calmly. "And where exactly do you think I belong?" Before the answer came, a soft ring interrupted. The woman picked up the phone. After listening briefly, she pointed to the door on the left. "He'll see you now." Diana entered. The office looked like a penthouse in a five-star hotel. Panoramic views of the city, dark wood furniture, and marble details. Richard was standing with his back to her, staring at the city as if he owned it, and in a way, it was. "Mr. Santoro," she said firmly. He turned. He wasn't wearing a suit or tie. He was wearing a light gray sweater, casual but still expensive. His eyes were different. Not cold, just tired. "Thank you for coming. Ms. Johnson, please sit down." She sat down. He did too. For a few seconds, they were silent, but not the awkward silence, the silence that comes when two people know something important is about to be said. "I have a proposition," he said bluntly. "I want to hire you as a waitress in your home, as a therapy companion for my son." Diana blinked. She hadn't expected that. "I have the best physical therapists in the country," he continued. "But what you did yesterday, that was different. That worked." She took a deep breath. She didn't smile. She didn't get excited. She just looked him in the eye. "Mr. Santoro, yesterday wasn't an experiment. It was a human gesture. I didn't dance to cure your son. I danced because he saw me, because I saw him." He ran his hand over his face uneasily. "I can pay you 5 times what you earn. Today I'm not for sale." Silence. "I won't accept working for someone who only sees me when he needs me," she added. "Your son doesn't need more specialists. He needs someone who won't try to fix him, but who will accompany him." She opened her purse, took out a crumpled card and placed it on the table. "Freedom Steps, Thursdays, 4 in the afternoon. Classes are free. If you want to take him, you're welcome. But there, he's the one in charge." And before he could answer, Diana stood up and walked to the door with the same firm posture she had entered with. In the room, Richard Santoro stood in silence, staring at the card as if it were a riddle that he, with all his fortune, had solved. He still didn't know how to solve it. Richard stood in front of the table, the Freedom Steps card still between his fingers, as if it was something heavier than it really was. This wasn't just an invitation. It was a break in the logic he had always lived by, the idea that everything can be solved with money. On the computer screen, with one click he accessed her full name, Diana Johnson. It took him 3 minutes to pull up everything: documents, records, public profiles, social networks, but it was a simple article from a community newspaper that caught his attention. Freedom Steps Project brings dance and inclusion to children with disabilities in the Bronx outskirts. The photos showed a modest room, colorful walls, handwritten posters, children with crutches, walkers, wheelchairs, all smiling. In one of the images, there was her, Diana, kneeling next to a girl with cerebral palsy, smiling with her eyes. Richard frowned, kept reading. Created by Diana Johnson and her sister Zoe, the project began 6 years ago as a volunteer initiative to promote autonomy and self-esteem through adapted dance. Today, it struggles to survive due to lack of funding. In the corner of the article, a detail that caught him off guard, a mention of New York University and an interrupted master's degree. He clicked. Diana Johnson, Bachelor's in Child Development, NYU, Master's in Special Education. Incomplete. That dismantled the image he had built of her a little more. In Richard's mind, she was a waitress who had had a lucky break. But now she seemed like someone who had been struggling, studying, building and being ignored. Across the building, in the reception room, Miss Winters was nervously drumming her fingers on the table. When she saw Diana leave, she raised an eyebrow. "How much did he offer?" Diana simply replied, "More than my conscience is worth." Winters gave a short, skeptical laugh. "You know, I've seen a lot of people come in here saying they don't sell themselves. But after seeing the zeros in the proposal, Diana turned and looked her straight in the eye. Maybe it's because you're used to seeing people who have forgotten their own worth. Before the answer came, Diana pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened, she stepped inside without looking back. Back at his desk, Richard was still staring at the photos on the community newspaper's website. A notification flashed on the screen. Donation declined. Santoro Foundation has once again rejected a proposal to support the Freedom Steps project. Date: 4 months ago. He swallowed hard. He had signed that paper without reading it properly. Just another request among hundreds. Just another request for help with no commercial appeal. And now, he saw that he had missed something big. Something that could truly change his son's life. With a rare impulse, he picked up the phone. Evelyn, I need you to get me all the previous reports on this project. Freedom Steps. I want to understand why we turned it down. Sure, sir, the assistant on the other end of the line said, surprised. And schedule an appointment with Dr. Landon. I want to know if he thinks my son is worth dancing. He hung up, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't seem in control. He was just following someone else's lead. 3 days passed. Richard didn't answer, didn't email, didn't call. Diana hadn't expected him to. She knew that men like him lived in a world where the simplest decision involved a dozen consultants, and one illogical step could cost millions. But Lucas had sensed something, and sometimes, when instinct speaks louder than argument, it's the child who guides the adult. On Thursday afternoon, as Diana was sorting through the ribbons in the makeshift hall of the community center, Zoe, her sister, came running out. There's a Bentley outside, Rhea, Diana asked, without looking up. With tinted windows, a driver and everything. And you have to see who's in there. Diana went to the window. There was the car, parked in front of the building's broken sidewalk, and inside it, in the back seat, was Lucas. She stared intently at the entrance, her face pressed against the glass, as if seeking an invisible permission to leave. He came, Diana murmured, mostly to herself and his father. Zoe asked. Still in the car. Diana replied, watching the man in the front seat, his hands firm on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the street, as if he were afraid to be seen there. Men like him don't get out, Zoe said bitterly. They send their children, their donations, their names on plaques, but never themselves. Diana smiled slightly, never taking her eyes off the boy. Never underestimate the power of a determined son. And then something happened. The car door opened. First, Lucas got out, supporting himself carefully on the bars of his legs. Then, with some reluctance, Richard got out too. He was wearing dark jeans and a blue sweater. No designer watch, no bodyguards, no shield. He looked around as if he was stepping into unfamiliar territory. The graffiti on the walls, the children playing in the courtyard, the muffled sounds of children's music coming from the hall. When they walked through the door, Diana was waiting for them. Welcome to Freedom Steps. Lucas smiled. A real smile. And even though he was hesitant, he glanced at his father before taking the next step. Richard nodded, almost imperceptibly. Go ahead, he said in a choked voice. I'll be right here. As Diana led the boy to the group, Zoe appeared next to Richard with a plastic chair. The first day is always the hardest. For the parents, not for the children. Richard sat down. He looked around with a look divided between skepticism and curiosity. This doesn't exactly sound like therapy, he said. It's not, Zoe replied. It's freedom. Inside, the children danced to a soft beat. Nothing was forced. Nothing was choreographed. Each one found their own movement in their own time. Richard saw a girl spinning around in a wheelchair, a boy with a prosthesis happily imitating steps. Little by little, Lucas began to loosen up. First he raised his arms. Then, he moved his feet shyly. Diana didn't correct him. She just followed along, at his own pace. Richard felt something strange, a mixture of discomfort and hope. Across the room, a door opened. A gray-haired woman, dressed soberly and carrying an elegant cane, entered with presence. She looked around the room with trained eyes. Zoe bowed discreetly to Richard and whispered, "That's Dr. Elaine Mercer, neuroscientist, Harvard, retired. She coordinates the study behind the project study." Richard asked, "Yes. Here, dancing isn't just art, it's science." And at that moment, for the first time in years, Richard Santoro felt like he had entered a place where he wasn't the most important thing. And, strangely, that was a relief. Richard didn't know where to put his hands. Sitting in a plastic chair, surrounded by walls in need of paint and children with leg braces and crutches in their hands, he felt small, and this was new to him. Dr. Elaine Mercer walked slowly but with dignity. Her cane was etched with ancient engravings, and her eyes, though covered by thin glasses, saw beyond the surface. She greeted each child by name, asked questions about their movements, and stopped to observe details. When she reached Richard, she recognized him immediately. "Mr. Santoro," she said with a slight smile. "I didn't expect to see you around here." Richard stood up, disconcerted. "Dr. Mercer, I didn't know you were involved with this place." She raised her cane slightly. I'm in charge of the research program behind the project. Research? He frowned. I thought this was a community dance class. She gave a short laugh. Oh, it's much more than that. What you see is movement, Mr. Santoro. What's happening inside, in the brains of these little ones, is transformation. Motor autonomy generates new neural connections. They're not just having fun, they're rebuilding themselves. Zoe appeared discreetly beside them, handing them a freshly printed article. We published the first results this morning, she said excitedly. The press will be here soon. Richard took the paper. The title was technical, full of complicated words, but a bold sentence hit him like a punch. Autonomy in movement is as important as clinical support. The child needs to be the protagonist, not the patient. He looked at Diana, who was dancing with a little girl using a walker. Neither of them told the other what to do. They just shared the moment. She was your assistant, wasn't she? Richard asked. Dr. Mercer Cothor, the doctor corrected. The project was born from her mind. I just advise. Richard frowned. But she didn't finish her master's degree. No, she had to stop to take care of her sister. But that didn't stop her from thinking like a scientist and acting like a revolutionary. Before he could answer, Diana stepped closer. Lucas is adapting quickly, she said calmly. He's already tried 3 different moves on his own, without fear of making mistakes. Richard nodded, still processing everything. Why didn't you ever tell me who you were? He asked that night at the restaurant. Diana looked him in the eye. Because that night, you wouldn't have listened. Silence. Was it all a plan? He persisted. The restaurant, the invitation, the card. You lured me here. She smiled, not denying it. I saw an opportunity to show you something you refused to see, and I took it. But the moment with Lucas, that wasn't planned. He made the choice. I just followed. The front doors opened. Reporters began to enter, with cameras, microphones, and curious eyes. Richard immediately tensed. What's this? Zoe showed him a cover story. Rehabilitation project revolutionary in the Bronx. Meet Freedom Steps. We're taking in advantage of the publication to bring in the press. This is our chance to show the world what's happening here. Richard clenched his fist. Was he being exposed? Used? Did you bring cameras to showcase my son? Diana approached calmly. I brought cameras to show what's possible when we let a child lead. If you want to hide, the exit is the same way you came in. But Lucas is about to take a step that no doctor thought possible. A buzz filled the room. Everyone looked toward the center. Lucas, his cheeks flushed, had removed one of the splints by himself. He was trying to balance himself with just the other. Richard took a step forward, instinctively. Lucas, watch out. But Diana stopped him with her hand. Wait, watch. Lucas took a deep breath, and, with the concentration of someone facing a huge challenge, he took a step, just one, but without support, without direction, without fear. And in that moment, Richard saw it. Not a frail body trying to stay upright, but a whole boy, finally feeling strong. The room fell into absolute silence. Not even the flashes of the cameras interrupted the moment. All eyes were on Lucas, who, with his hands slightly raised for balance, had just taken a full step without any support. His right foot was shaking. His body was swaying. But there he was, standing, on his own. The other children applauded first, then the volunteers, and finally the journalists who, even without fully understanding the medical significance of it, felt the emotional weight of that moment. Richard stood still. There was no preparation for this. No company report, no meeting. No billion-dollar decision had given him the feeling that was now rising in his throat. That of a father who had seen his own son break through an invisible barrier. He did it, he murmured, almost to himself. Diana nodded with a calm smile. And he did it because no one was telling him how. Lucas, upon seeing his father, smiled radiantly. His eyes shone. It was as if to say, see, Dad, I can do it. But before Richard could react, a reporter approached. Mr. Santoro, a word, please. Is it true that your foundation has rejected the request for funding for this project 3 times? Another question followed shortly after. Does this change your position? Do you intend to support Freedom Steps now? Richard remained silent. The cameras were on him. The name Santoro was too well known for any answer to go unnoticed. He looked at Lucas, who was playing with another child, beaming. Then he looked at Diana, who was looking at him firmly, but without arrogance. Then, for the first time in a long time, Richard took a deep breath and told the truth. Do you know what's hardest for someone like me? He began, looking straight into the cameras, admitting when you're wrong. A buzz ran through the room. The journalists looked at each other in surprise. I rejected this project 3 times because I read the numbers, but I didn't see the people, because I looked at the costs, but I didn't see the human benefits. Because I've gotten used to believing that answers come from the truth. Good things come with long titles and glass-enclosed meetings. But today, today I saw a simple miracle happen, and it changes everything. Diana crossed her arms. Zoe, beside her, put her hand to her mouth in surprise. The Santoro Foundation has committed to fully funding Freedom Steps for the next 5 years. And what's more, we're going to build the first Johnson Mercer methodology-based rehabilitation center, right here in the Bronx. The applause erupted like fireworks. But Diana remained serious. She knew what was coming, and she didn't hesitate. On one condition, Richard added, turning to her. You'll have complete autonomy. No corporate interference. No committees approving every step. No control disguised as support. Now, she smiled slightly. So, do we have a deal? Yes, he replied firmly. And in that moment, the empire of power, control, and distance that Richard had built throughout his life gave way, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. He had finally understood. There are achievements that money can't buy, purchase, but humility that opens doors that had been locked for a long time. 3 months later, the sound of tractors and the smell of fresh cement took over a previously forgotten lot in the heart of the Bronx where there had been trash and abandonment. Now stood solid walls, with wide windows and gentle ramps replacing steps. The dream had come true, and it had a name, Freedom Steps Center. It was not the largest center funded by the Santoro Foundation. It did not have imported marble or crystal chandeliers, but it was, without a doubt, the most humane. Each space was designed with the help of the children and their parents. The hallways were wide enough for those using wheelchairs. The walls had colors chosen by votes among the students. And the rooms were not. They had chairs lined up like in doctors' offices. They had mats, mirrors, colored ropes, and adapted dance equipment. Diana walked around the construction site with a white helmet and spreadsheets in her hands. She was the project director, responsible for every decision, and no one dared to contradict her. Zoe, always by her side, organized meetings with families, architects, and physiotherapists. And, to everyone's surprise, Richard also showed up. Discreetly, no photographers, no speeches, just with a notepad, trying to understand, learn, participate. I never thought you'd actually show up at the planning meetings, Diana commented one afternoon, while the two of them were analyzing the design for the sensory room. I never thought I'd be studying neuroplasticity at 50, he replied, running his hand over his tired eyes. On the table was a scientific article covered in colored post-its, highlighted passages, questions written down by hand. Richard read it, with genuine interest. Is this part of your public penance? She teased, with a slight smile. Yes, it is, he replied. But the other part is, because I care. Because Lucas asked me to be here. Diana was silent for a few seconds. Then she pointed to a photograph on the table. It was Lucas, standing with only one of the braces on his leg, smiling. He had the second brace removed last week, she said. None of the specialists thought he would make it before 2 years. I know, Richard murmured. He told me, with pride. And the old physical therapist? Fired, he replied without hesitation. She convinced me that my son was a burden. You showed me that he is light. Diana nodded. And why didn't you ever apologize? Richard looked her in the eye. Because I didn't think "and sorry" was enough. And you're right, she said firmly. But being told I was wrong was a good start. At that moment, a girl with a prosthesis ran through the side door with a drawing in her hands. Auntie Diana, Aunt Diana, she cried. Look at the logo we drew for the entrance. It was a child's silhouette with open arms, with a phrase underneath. Each step is a beginning. Richard looked at the image, then at Diana. This will be the biggest investment of my life, he said quietly. It will be the only one that was really worth it, she replied. The opening day arrived. The sky was clear, a rare gift for a New York spring. Children and families filled the courtyard of the new Freedom Steps Center, now shiny and colorful, with little flags hanging between the trees and balloons attached to each railing of the entrance ramp. Music echoed softly through the room, mixed with laughter and the metallic sounds of prosthetics hitting the ground as part of the melody. Here, everything was part of the dance. Lucas, now with only a light orthosis on his left ankle and a modified sneaker on his right, was in the center of the main hall with 3 other children. They were about to perform a short choreography they had created themselves. Richard watched from the sidelines, hands in his pockets, his heart racing like it would at any business meeting. Diana approached, smiling, nervous. Very, he confessed. And that's weird. I've never felt like this before an event. It's because for the first time, you don't control what's going to happen, she said tenderly. You're just watching. He nodded. And then, the lights dimmed, the music started, and Lucas took the first step. It was firm, sure, every movement had intention, even if it was limited. He didn't dance like other boys his age, but he danced like him in his own time, with his own strength, and with a lightness that didn't match someone who spent 2 years being told he'd never walk without help again. Halfway through the choreography, Lucas took the hand of a girl with mild cerebral palsy and led her to the center. She smiled with her eyes. He let her lead the next step. The audience applauded, but Richard just took a deep breath, trying not to let the tears overflow. Diana put her hand on his shoulder. He doesn't need you to hold him anymore, Richard, I know, he said, his voice breaking. But he still needs me to be around. Exactly, she said. That's what being a father is, and that you can't buy it. Right after the presentation, a reporter approached Richard. Mr. Santoro, how does it feel to see all this happening before your eyes? He looked at Lucas, who was now helping a smaller girl get up from a slight fall, with the same care Diana once had with him. Proud, he answered. Not of what he overcame, but of what he created. The reporter continued. And what was the biggest lesson you learned since you met Freedom Steps? Richard took a deep breath. He looked around. He saw the walls painted with hopeful phrases. He saw excited parents, children playing, and Diana at his side, holding a clipboard with new ideas already emerging. Then he looked at the camera and said that true leaders are not those who show the way, but those who have the courage to follow when someone shows them a better direction. And at that moment, with all the spotlight on him, Richard Santoro was not the billionaire who controlled empires. He was just a man who had finally learned to listen. A year had passed since that first dance. Freedom Steps was now more than a center. It was a movement. 3 new units had opened in different cities. Volunteers were multiplying. Families sent videos of children dancing in their backyards, in schools, in hospitals. The methodology created by Diana and perfected with Dr. Mercer began to be studied by universities. Doctors previously skeptical now recommended the program as an essential complement to traditional rehabilitation. Diana received invitations to speak. She turned down most of them. She preferred to be there, with her feet on the ground, her hand on each child's shoulder, and her eye on the little details. She still lived in the Bronx. She still used public transportation, but now when she walked down the street she was called by name, or simply the girl with the steps. She laughed one morning when she saw a mural on a community wall, colorful graffiti with the phrase, "First step, own pace." It was signed by a 12-year-old former student at the local public school. Lucas now attended regular classes. He used a light cane on the most tiring days, but he refused to be treated as an exception. He was known for being kind, observant, and courageous. In the eyes of his peers, he was not the billionaire's boy. He was just Lucas who could dance better than most. One rainy morning, Richard showed up downtown with a crooked umbrella. He arrived wet, unannounced, with a box in his hands. "I brought you something," he said to Diana, entering the small office. She looked up in surprise. Inside the box was a gold trophy on a wooden base. It read, "National Award for Innovation in Pediatric Rehabilitation presented to educator Diana Johnson." She touched the trophy gently. But she didn't take it. "It was well deserved," Richard said. She smiled. "You still marvel at what we can do, don't you?" "Not anymore. Now I just watch and follow." They both laughed, at peace. Before leaving, Richard stopped at the door. "Diana, I never said, but thank you." She looked at him for listening to me, for teaching me. Later that afternoon, Lucas gave a short performance for a group of new students. The choreography was simple, but with something special. Each step had a pause where he said a phrase. "You don't have to walk like the others," he said at one of these moments. "You just have to start." At the back of the room, Richard watched. Next to him, Diana. Neither of them said anything. When the music ended, Lucas bowed awkwardly, but proudly. Applause filled the room. "Do you think he'll continue on this path?" Richard asked. "I have no doubt," Diana replied. "Because this path ... is now his." And that's how that story ended. Not with applause from celebrities, not with billion-dollar prizes, but with the firm steps of a boy who once just wanted to dance, and of a woman who had the courage to accept the invitation. In a world where power usually comes from above, this revolution began on the ground, with a silent gesture, and with someone willing to follow even without knowing this.